Hi, everyone, and welcome to this next session. I'm Jose Quinteros, part of the organizing committee, and it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Louise Worsley. She has more than 30 years of experience as a consultant, speaker, and mentor to project professionals across the globe. She has as well some an incredible academic background as a former associate lecturer at the University of Cape Town, and she continues to share her expertise through research, collaborations, and guest teaching, particularly in the area of stakeholder engagement and leadership. Louise is also an author of stakeholder led project management, changing the way we manage projects, and a contributing author to the rise of the chief project officer. Beyond her writing, Louise, plays a key role in the international PMO community. That's why she's here, and she's a long-time judge for the PMO Global Awards and mentor to senior PMO leaders, and so much more. So, quite an honor to have her here. Today, she'll be sharing insights on shaping the future, lessons from PMOs, and please join me in welcome her. And Luis, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jose. Thank you. You know, it was some 8 years ago that I got a call on my telephone, and it was a +55 number. I don't know if any of you out there know where +55 is, but I didn't know. And I remember looking at the number and thinking, oh, call center. And I didn't answer that call. And then I looked up and saw +55. That's Brazil. So next time that that number called, I did answer it, thank goodness, because it was a gentleman I think many of you will know, which was Americo Pinto. And what he wanted was for us in South Africa to put forward a PMO for the PMO competition, which started in its first year 8 years ago. So we managed to get a PMO to go forward. And over the years, to be honest, South Africa's done quite well in the PMO competition. We set up our own local PMO group and we provided mentoring to the PMOs. It was a great experience. And 3 years ago, one of our PMOs, Capitec Bank, I think it's 3 years ago, they won the PMO Global Awards, which was a great experience. So PMO Global Awards. Also, I have been involved with PMO mentoring on the PMO Leader program. You know, both of these are fantastic ways of learning. If you're at all interested, in particular in the PMO mentoring program, then Bruno this afternoon, I think 3 or 4 hours time, he will be doing the panel session on the mentoring, where we're going to have people like myself who are mentors, but also some of our mentees talking about the experience of being part of that program. So if it's something you're interested in, please do go, because I think it's just a great way of sharing experiences across our PMOs. So I want to kind of today combine insights from my work as a PMO judge, from my work as a PMO mentor, and also from my work in academia, doing research around PMOs. And one thing that's completely certain if we're working with PMOs is that you aren't standing still. We just can't stand still in this world today. Project offices are having to adapt to change, and not just adapt to change, they're often the ones that are leading the change in our organizations. So I want to share with you 4 insights, but in particular, I want to look not just as what they can tell us about now, but also to look at what they might help us think about in what we need to do in the future to continue to be those great PMOs that we need to be in our organizations. So starting with this one, 8 years ago, when I was involved in some of the early PMO judging, PMOs would talk to us about the processes they were using, what they were doing within their project offices. And let's face it, to be a great PMO, you've got to have great processes. There's no doubt about that. And if they were measuring their maturity, then the chances were then what they were using was P30, which some of you may have come across. It's still used today. It came out of UK government. It's a way of assessing the maturity of our project offices using portfolio program and project office types of techniques. And it tells us about whether we are doing things right. But I'm sure as you're sitting there, you know that it's not just about doing things right. We've also got to make sure that we're doing the right things. So today we see this big focus. Are we actually delivering value to our organizations? Can we show that we are delivering value? Are we measuring ourselves so that we can show that we are genuinely delivering value into our organizations? And if the PMOs are measuring themselves in this environment, the chances are many of them in the last couple of years, I see more and more of the PMOs are using things like the PMO value ring, which came out of the PMO Global Alliance, which is of course now part of PMI. And the PMO value ring forces us as project officers to consider not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it. What is it that our organization wants? What is it that our stakeholders want? And how do we ensure that what we deliver is focused on value? So we see that. We know that PMOs, you guys, we have to be process centric. We have to do the right things. We have to make sure we're doing it right. But it's not just value, because it turns out value is a bit of a complex thing to define. Value is a little bit like beauty, where beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so is value. So, in order for us to understand value, then we've got to make sure that we understand who are the stakeholders of our project office. So, great PMOs today have a very clear view about who their stakeholders are, and then they can link that to what is the value that those stakeholders are looking for from our project office. And getting that stakeholder view can be a bit tricky for us in project offices. I'm sure you're aware of this idea that project offices have to reinvent themselves. There's been work done in academia about why PMOs have to invent themselves. One of my colleagues here in South Africa, he's a PMO manager of some 15 years in one organization, and he described to me how he estimates that every 3 years over that 15-year period, so that's 5 times, he had to reinvent the project office. Now, what the academic research suggests is that one of the major reasons that we reinvent ourselves or have to reinvent ourselves is because the stakeholders in our organizations change. Who is a legitimate stakeholder? Who is the person whose voice we need to listen to in order to work out how and why we are delivering will change on us. And I'm sure you've all experienced that at some point. So in order to be this great PMO, it's almost like a hygiene factor. You have to do it right. You have to understand the value, but as we look forward, you have to have ways of ensuring that you are tied to the stakeholders. You understand who the stakeholders are in your organization. So you should always be able to answer the question, who are your stakeholders and who are they likely to be in the future? And you know that you're doing that right when you can hear your stakeholders' voices in the way you describe your PMO. And that's something as a judge I am looking for when I am involved in looking at PMOs is I don't want to hear the PMO telling me this is what we should be doing. What I want to hear is their clients' voices in the way that they describe the value that they are delivering and why they are doing it. Second one, in our own PMO competitions here in South Africa, I think 4 or 5 years ago, something we started to see emerge, and I'd love to hear in the comments, perhaps you can put some comments and I can have a look at those. We started to see emerge the idea of an agile project office, where organizations actually call themselves an agile project office. I don't know if you had those in your countries. It'd be great to hear and share about that. Nowadays, I don't hear that so much. The words that we tend to hear nowadays are things like hybrid. And in fact, I'm just checking, Christina was talking about the chameleon project office just before me, and I think that's a lovely word for it too. What we're seeing now is this move towards the adaptive environments. Now, moving towards an adaptive environment means essentially saying rather than there's one size fits all, in an adaptive environment, what we're essentially saying is, well, it varies. And let me tell you, as Christina was talking about, that's a lot more complex than being in an environment where we can say there's just one way of doing it. So I suggest, and I think Christina came up with some great other things as well, but I suggest there's three things that we got to get right if we're going to support our projects and our people in being in this adaptive environment. The first thing is we have to have approaches and techniques to help the projects understand what is the most appropriate approach for them to take. And you might do that through some sort of project categorization, but whatever it is, the PMO should be supportive in encouraging projects to consider that there isn't just one way of doing things, but that maybe given the characteristics of the projects, there may be different ways of doing things, whether it's choosing that this project fits best to an agile, pure agile, this project fits best to a pure predictive, or this project actually is going to have to be in that complex area in between, the chameleon area in between, where we're using hybrid approaches. So the first thing is we need to be able to have techniques for helping our projects understand which is the best approach. The second thing, or the second challenge that our projects will face, and we need to find ways of helping them through this, is that in an adaptive environment, we need resources which can fit to the types of projects that we are running. It's no good taking a team who have basically run for the last 2 years in an agile environment and then throwing a project at them like a compliance project or a grudge project where predictive techniques are required and expecting them to suddenly change overnight into using those kinds of more waterfall or predictive types of techniques, and vice versa. You know, and I think most people know, if you take a team who's primarily worked in a predictive environment, then we need to train them into agile techniques. But it's more than just training, it's changing the mindset and approach. So in the PMO, we need to make sure that we enable our staff to be able to move between these two. And I think also importantly, we need to be able to recognize where there is a mismatch, where perhaps where the resources and the skills and the competence and the capability available in the team, if it doesn't match the demands of the particular project, then we need to be there to help them through that process, whether it's by reskilling or by bringing in new resources or generally helping them through that approach. The third thing that I think we have to get right is we have to ensure that our stakeholders and senior management have been taken on the journey of this adaptive approach, because it's a bigger sell. You know, in the past, we said to our managers, don't worry, one way of doing it, we'll just get on with it. Now, what we're saying to them is, no, it varies. There are different ways that we may choose to do these particular projects. In one organization I work with here in South Africa, it's ShopRite. It's a very large retail group. They use a technique to help projects identify both governance structures and what is the best development approach. Essentially, they talk about projects which are type A's, type B's, and C's, whatever names they use. They're like type A's, type B's, and type C's. And what I think is great about what they've done is I was in a workshop involving very senior people within the organization, people who were dialing in up to CEO, CO level. And I was sitting listening, and what I heard was the senior stakeholders started to have conversations like, well, I think that's a type A project, or maybe this is just a type C project. And it was fantastic to hear senior management having acculturized, having taken on board the fact, first of all, that there are different types of projects. And perhaps even more importantly, that these different types of projects had an impact upon the way that they applied their leadership and on the way that they applied the oversight and governance to their projects. And that's incredibly important. We can't just create an adaptive environment. We've actually got to create the culture amongst our stakeholders where they understand the implications for that adaptive environment, and in particular for our senior managers, that they understand what the implications are for them in working and managing within these adaptive environments. Insight number 3, we can't really talk about the future without talking about AI. And I spoke to my friendly AI and I said to it, I wanted a slide representing AI in PMOs, and it said I should have a lighthouse generated by an AI. So I asked it if it could generate it for me, and this is what it generated, which is great, not great quality, but it's an AI generated slide. So in the AI area, I think we know that actually machine learning AI, it's not that new to us in projects. It has been around for a little while. I think it was probably 4 years ago that I saw a presentation made by a financial institution in Australia talking about their use of machine learning. And what they were doing is that they were using data they had with machine learning, and they were using it to attempt to predict on projects, using this data to allow them to predict on other projects as early as possible whether intervention was needed within that project. And they'd done some fantastic work on it. It was really exciting to hear them talking about it. And there were 3 things that I felt they got right. We had this panel session this morning on AI, and I think there's some great stuff coming through, but we need some ideas about how do we go about this? Well, what they had done, the first thing that was really important was that they had made a decision about what it was they were going to try to use machine learning, AI, for. And I think that's very important, that the first thing we do is we don't say, well, let's use AI. We say, here's a problem, specific problem, how might we use AI? And they had chosen it to say, what we want to be able to do is to be able to predict as early as possible whether this is a project which needs intervention, whether this is a project which should be appearing very high up on our steering group's concerns, some way of using this to take indicators and identify this is a project that needs further intervention. The second thing that they had gotten right is that they had a lot of data. And I think that's something we have to realize if we're going to start to use AI, is you need to have a lot of data. And even more importantly, you need to have a lot of trend data. Now, I don't know, and I'd love again to hear this in your comments, in the comments that you put forward about your feelings about this, is that some of the enterprise data systems I see are great at collecting data, but they're not so fantastic at collecting trends on data. And the truth is, if we want to use data to be predictive, then the trends turn out to be some of the most important data that we need to have available to us. So we need to be able to get at that trending data on our projects. And they were using this data in order to do the analysis. And then the third thing they did, and Christina, no, in fact, the panel talked about this, is that the people who were involved in this project, they weren't project specialists. What they were was amazing mathematicians. I think at least one of them had a PhD in some kind of mathematics. So they had brought in very specialist skills in order to support them in putting in place this project. And I think that's also something that we have to think about as we start to apply AI in our project environments, is what are these specialist skills that we need to bring on board? Now, there's some interesting things that they found about their data. They were looking at status reporting data, which would have things like red, amber, green reporting. It would have lots of numerical analysis. It would have the text that the project manager had written, all that classic stuff you would start to see in a status report. And what was kind of interesting about it is that one of the things that came out was that what the project manager wrote and the sentiments that they expressed in the way they wrote it was often more predictive about concerns on the project than the numbers. Let me just repeat that. So actually listening to the way that project managers talk to us about their projects may tell us at least as much, if not more, than the way they give us the numbers and the red, amber, green reports. An interesting thing perhaps to think about in terms of being not too careful to make this too processized. So this ability to look at the sentiment is something which AI can perhaps help us with. Now, following on from this, myself and some people at UCT, University of Cape Town, we were looking at what might be interesting areas to do agile, try again to do AI research on. And these are some of the areas that we feel were quite interesting and coming to the fore in project management. If you are interested in this area, I noticed early on we had one of the participants, I think early this morning, was Professor Iksan, who is from Indonesia. And he and some of his students have done some fantastic research on the use of AI in projects. If anybody, if you can't find Professor Iksan, then please do reach out for me. I can point you towards one of the papers that they've published in this area. As you can imagine, AI is one of those research areas where it's really quite hard to keep up with it because things are moving so quickly. But they have been doing some great research in that area. So we started to look at some of these, and the one that I think was quite fun is we started with the AI-driven sentiment analysis, and we kind of reversed it. And to give you the context for this research, or I don't think it's grand enough to call it research, some initial investigations, is we were working with a client, and the problem that we identified, or they identified they'd like to look at, is that one where I'm sure we will have it. Those project managers who you maybe manage or you have reporting to your PMO, and they're fantastic project managers, but then when they write an email, it's like poke you in the face. Their communication, their email communication is can actually put the backs up of some stakeholders. And you will probably have one or two people who you know like that, who are really good, but somehow or other their written communication leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of generating the right responses from the people they're working with, from their stakeholders. So we started with that as a going concern. And for us in South Africa, it's quite important because here we have 12 different recognized languages. So it's not unusual that project managers may well be communicating and writing, because English is the normal language to be used in business. It may be that they are writing in a language which is not their first language even. And I think this is becoming more important when we look at things like global projects, is that we are working with people where even though English might be being used, it's not necessarily their first language. So here's the context. What this PMO wanted to do was to see if it could use AI to improve the way that the project managers communicated with their stakeholders. And the first thing we did, and it was quite a fun thing to do, is we ran a workshop to find out what were the 4 or 5 major reasons that emails would be written to stakeholders. So to really find out what are we writing this email for? And we identified, I think it's 4 or 5. One of them, for example, is this email is being written to elicit a decision. This email is being written to get somebody to commit to attending an event. It's quite a fun thing to do, and you could try it in your own PMOs. What are the reasons we're doing these communications? And then what we did is we said, okay, we'd like this sample group of project managers, they would be able to use AI, but they would have prompt questions that they would use with the AI. And they would write their email, and then they would, for example, say, please, can you check this email? I want it to create a decision about X. And then the AI would then check it, make some suggestions, make a rewrite. End result, yes, the feedback was that actually the emails did improve. It's quite possible that one of the reasons that the emails improved was because we forced project managers to think about what they were trying to achieve before they sent their emails. But we also got this smoothing, and the recipients reported that they felt that the email had been well written and well structured, and they felt good about their email. So there's a lot more research to be done in that area. But you can see here, getting those principles right, making sure if you're going to use AI, be clear about why you're trying to use it. involve groups, make sure that you're transparent and communicate. All the people who are involved in it were aware that this AI was being used, and then get that feedback and see if it can work. Because I think one of the things as we go into this for the PMOs is we shouldn't be gatekeepers or barriers to people's use of AI, but we are going to have to help create the right approaches and rules. In the panel session earlier today on AI, we asked about the use of ethics. And although AI is primarily currently being used for things like evaluating data, as we start to move into it, things like sentiment analysis or assessing stakeholder agendas, then clearly they were going to have more and more ethical decisions that need to be thought through. And I think the PMO has to start to think those through and start to prepare the environment, the project environment, for how we're going to go about doing this. So one last thing, it is clear when I'm listening to PMO managers and I'm listening to PMOs in the global competition, for example, is that one of the things that we are all striving to be and want to be is that valued and valuable strategic partner. And that means that we're not just there for the execution of projects, that we are there to worry about making sure that sustainable value is delivered into our organizations. And there are many ways that we have to change in order to be that strategic partner. One of the ways that I feel that we are seeing more and more as we go into the future is the role of the PMO in implementation, in authorization, in the change management processes. Now, over the years, I have seen in the competition probably only one or two PMOs who have called themselves a change management office. They are relatively rare, and in South Africa, I maybe see them very rarely again. But we see PMOs attempting to incorporate change management practices into the PMO. And I would welcome your views on whether you think this is working or not. The one PMO I saw do this, and they did it amazingly, was a health group. It was in North America. And what I found interesting about their approach is that they had started out as a change management office right from the beginning. So they weren't a project office who then evolved and added change and value management onto it. They started out right from the beginning, calling themselves a change management office. They were populated by people who thought of themselves as change managers first and project managers second. And the way they talked, the way they described their client interactions, the way they described outcomes rather than outputs was very much in line with this idea of how do we ensure that we create not just projects, but how do we ensure we create sustainable change within our organization? So I think the fourth challenge I'd put to you here is that can we evolve into that? Or is it more of a revolutionary process? Do we almost like need to pull up the tree, throw it out and start again if we're genuinely going to be this partner and this change management type of approach? So in summary, we've been through 4 areas here, and I'd love to hear your views on which of these you think are important and other things I'm sure you're going to say are important as we look into the future. That first one, how do we get better at defining our value? But most importantly, how do we ensure that value is linked to stakeholders? And as our stakeholders change, how do we use feedback loops to ensure that we are constantly realigning ourselves to the needs of legitimate stakeholders in our organization? How are we going to support adaptive planning? And how are we going to promote that one size doesn't fit all anymore and ensure that our organization and our project teams feel comfortable and able and capable in that environment? And if you could do an AI right now, where are you focusing on? What particular thing would you like to focus on? And then finally, how do we become that strategic power? To try again, that strategic partner. And how are you gearing up to make sure that change is an element is being addressed appropriately in our projects. So before I finish now, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm hoping that Jose, you can help me here, and we'll just put up that poll if that's possible.
Yeah, for sure. I will show it on the stage. There you go. We already have some votes, so the rest of the audience, you can vote right on the screen. Awesome. So the poll is, which of these factors is most important for you to attend to first in your organization? So we see value and stakeholder centricity winning with 13 votes. In second place, oh, it's 60, yes, 60%, promoting the adaptable environment. It's second place, utilizing AI, third place, and extending your change component in
And,
fourth place.
and, and I like there's a comment, I think from Matt, perhaps ask the change management question again after we've seen session 34. So you're probably right, Matt. Yes, we haven't been talking about it very much, have we? That's certainly true. And it's also interesting to see the value and stakeholder centricity, don't you think, Jose?
It
That
is.
aligning with our stakeholders. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, value and stakeholder centricity, it's, one of the uh, main things on the PMO environment, right? If you provide value to the right people, you're winning the race, right? So, uh, 60% of the audience backs that out, Luis. So
Yes.
I think we are in the right. Oh well, um, it's tight. It's tight.
Yes, and I would welcome your views where you voted for value and stakeholder centricity. Uh, how much of that is we know we need to be value driven, and how much of that is this dealing with the fact that we have to adapt and change to our stakeholders all the time? I would love to hear your views about that. And also on that adaptive environment, how what are you doing to adapt to that environment? And I see we've got one vote on AI. I'd love to hear what
Yeah.
area you think you would like to use AI in your organization. Please feel free to put those in the chat areas as well.
Yes.
I can see
Perfect.
we've got a question,
Yes.
Jose. Should we have a look at that?
Yes. Sanjeev from London. He has a question. What courses would you recommend PMO teams to equip for when looking at AI PMO?
Sanjeev, I wouldn't say that I am an expert on this, but what the organisation that I was talking about, ShopRite are known in South Africa for the innovation that they put into their products. Um, they um, they they have a completely separate innovation area, which is supported by IT through agile practices, and they're beginning to use things like AI and things like this. I noticed that they use the PMI. I think there is a perhaps if someone can correct me. I think there is a PMI AI in projects course now. So I think that's the one that they are using, but they also use the agile in projects one from the PMI. So they tend to use the PMI types of courses. So if anybody in the audience has more information on that, it would be great to perhaps share that with Sanjeev in the chat area. In terms of from academia, as I mentioned to you, we have a problem in that every now and then somebody comes up with the idea that we should have a project management journal or an ICMA journal which specialize in AI. But the time it takes to get a journal going is maybe 9 months. And the time that AI is moving is so fast. So I think the good thing to do is also to watch some of these people who are doing work in this area. I mentioned Professor Iksan and his people. As I said, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll point you towards some of the work they've been doing. But I think watching some of these people who are doing work in this area is another thing that we should be doing and seeing what they're coming up with. Stakeholders will always priority. Can we put that on the screen? Let's say the second question.
The second question, yes. Give me just a second. Hi from Paul, shown stage. There you go.
Yes, I don't know if I can talk about it a little bit. It's such an interesting area, isn't it, Michelle? I think that one of the problems we suffered in benefits management is that at some point, probably 4 or 5 years ago, it wandered off into a mathematical discipline, and that did it a lot of damage. And one of the things that benefits management is now much more related into, as you are saying here, is it's related into stakeholder management, because we have to be able to understand benefits from the stakeholder's point of view. So whenever we're looking at benefits, we have to be able to look at the business value proposition, but we also have to be able to look at client value proposition or the stakeholder value proposition. And the stakeholder value proposition comes from us understanding who our stakeholders are. And I think that's where benefits management has got to get better and better, because what happens is you compare um, the customer value proposition and the benefits value proposition. What you find is the zone of infeasible. There are things a business wants to achieve, but there are things that your stakeholders or your clients won't allow you to do because it would upset them so much for us to go into that area. And that's a really important debate we have to have about bringing together a value proposition which is both beneficial in the way the business wants it, but also can be achieved. We can actually take our stakeholders down that journey. Ashok, please feel free to comment, or I've actually done quite a few um, uh, blogs on this. And in fact, my research area at the moment is on looking at grudge projects. How do you justify grudge projects? Which are those projects which don't necessarily add value? I think that's a really interesting area too.
Awesome. Thank you, Luis. Is there any other question? I think I have. We have a couple of more minutes. If not, I think that. I think we don't have more questions, Luis. So thank you so much for that
Brilliant.
insightful session. Really great takeaways there. So, and thanks to all of you for joining and engaging in the chat and the Q&A. We'll now move on to our next session shortly. So feel free to stretch, grab a coffee, check out the agenda to see what's coming up next. And remember, you can continue the conversation with speakers and our sponsors by visiting our booth section. And thanks again, Luis. And for the audience, see you in the next session. Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.
Come and see us at mentoring. Don't forget the mentoring session. Bye now.
Bye.